Welcome to The Prince Eats. Check out this video for a version of West Africa's famous jollof rice. Ingredients are in the description. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please like, comment, subscribe, and share. This dish is authentic, tells a story, and even better, is simple to prepare. After a few simple steps, this dish will taste great the first time and every time as a leftover. A real win for weekly net cooking hours. Of course, the star of this show is rice, and we'll start this recipe off by talking about just that, the rice. This recipe calls for the long grain variety. You might have seen or experienced recipes where they use short grain rice or other versions of rice such as basmati rice. However, while those recipes do yield great outcomes, for this particular recipe, the long grain rice really stands up well to the sauce that we'll introduce and the long-term cooking that we'll do once the rice actually gets cooking in the pot. As you can see here, I'm washing the rice. The secret to any great jollof rice recipe is to first wash the rice. There's actually a few ways that you can wash the rice. Most people, as I'm doing here, wash the rice before they even boil it. Others, they actually boil the rice part way and then they rinse it afterwards. That's considered the parboiled method. You can skip some of these steps by purchasing parboiled rice, and then all you would have to do is simply rinse. But if you don't have that option, washing the rice is perfectly fine, and it only takes approximately 5 to 10 minutes. The objective of this step is to wash and rinse the rice until the water runs clear. As you can see here, the water is running clear. And when the water runs clear, you've essentially removed a good portion of the starch, which otherwise would cause for a sticky rice at the end of this recipe. Two characteristics of a great jollof rice is the grains don't stick together and the rice itself has a slight bite. Once rinsed, put the rice to the side. The next step in this cooking process is to prepare the sauce that we'll use to give the jollof rice its traditional flavor and color. Red peppers are used in most recipes to balance sweetness and acidity. Many jollof rice recipes have a heat profile, and the captain of that ship is most times Habanero Pepper or Scotch Bonnet. For this recipe, I use Habanero Pepper and Poblano Pepper. The Poblano Pepper and the Habanero Pepper do a great job of offering depth and height of spice. Of course, tomato is the most identifiable ingredient in any jollof rice recipe. Here I'm using Plum Tomatoes, which is the go-to for many jollof rice recipes in the Nigerian region. Two other ingredients that I utilize for this recipe is ginger and garlic. And while in many West African cultures the use of ginger and garlic in jollof rice is a bit inconsistent, I find that these two add great depth of flavor to this dish. And since I'll be roasting all of these veggies, the depth of flavor will be even more intense. The first thing you want to do is prep your veggies for roasting. And since I'll be placing these veggies in the food processor after roasting, I typically cut them down to a size appropriate for the food processor. For this recipe, we'll be using virtually every part of the vegetable with the exception of some of the seeds and the stems. Let's move on to the ginger. As you know, ginger is easily recognizable in any dish, in part due to the warming sensation that it produces due to its highly spicy profile. For this recipe, I use approximately a thumb size worth of ginger. As far as the aromatics are concerned, the garlic has great representation in this dish. Anyone who loves garlic understands the flavor complexity when it's roasted. The Poblano pepper is perhaps my favorite pepper for this recipe. And while this pepper does register as mild on the heat scale, it does pack enough heat to create a warming sensation for this jollof rice dish. What I love about the Poblano pepper is it's not oppressive in its heat, and it does offer a great complement and balance of heat to flavor. I normally use one Poblano pepper. And of course, in this recipe, the Habanero pepper has the biggest presence in the heat category. I won't be using any of the seeds for this jollof rice recipe. I'll layer the heat with other seasonings and peppers in this recipe. When using the seeds, sometimes I find that one too many seeds can tip the heat scale. And while possible, sometimes it's very difficult to neutralize heat once it's been introduced into a dish. So to eliminate that risk, I don't use the seeds at all in this recipe. For the onions, make sure that you cut them small enough so that they can fit in the food processor. This recipe calls for both red onions and sweet onions. 2 red onions will be needed, 1 for puree and 1 diced. For this recipe, you'll need to dice the onions small enough so that it's not noticeable in the rice. However, in many West African recipes, the red onion does have a visible presence in the rice. As you can see here, I diced the red onion pretty fine. And because they'll cook down so well, they won't be seen in the rice once the rice is done cooking. However, there will undoubtedly be beautiful hints of onion in this jollof rice dish. And perhaps as equally impressive is there won't be an oppressive taste of onion in this dish. The tomatoes are going to lose most of its moisture in the roasting process, so I find that cutting them in half works well. Once the veggies are cut, you're going to place them in a sheet pan. I have my sheet pan lined with parchment paper just to reduce some of the mess that comes with roasting veggies. You'll need to drizzle olive oil all over the veggies. Be certain that all of the veggies are evenly covered in olive oil, especially the garlic, which doesn't quite achieve a great roasting effect if it's not covered in olive oil. Place in the oven for approximately 1 hour at 425 degrees. Pulse blend them in the food processor afterwards. Once the veggies are roasted and blended, prepare for active cooking time. Grab the pot that you'll use to cook your rice and put it over medium-high heat. Drizzle enough cooking oil in your pot to fry the red onions. Once the oil starts to ripple, it's ready for frying. Carefully dump the onions into the pot, being careful not to create any big splashes. Be present in the moment when you're frying these onions. If you get a sense that the heat is too high or the onions begin to burn, don't hesitate to reduce the heat. After approximately 3 to 5 minutes, you're going to add a can of tomato paste to the onions. I use an entire can of tomato paste to add depth of tomato flavor in this jollof rice. A characteristic of a great jollof rice is bold tomato flavor. Allow approximately 2 to 3 minutes for the tomato paste to fry in the pot. You'll be ready to go to the next step when the tomato paste completely loosens and covers the bottom of the pot. This recipe calls for thyme, white pepper, curry powder, salt, dark chili powder, and chicken flavor. Dump the seasonings into the pot and allow them to fry for approximately 1 to 2 minutes. You'll need this time to allow the curry to activate. Don't hesitate to reduce the heat under the pot if this paste begins to burn. Next, I'll introduce the vegetables puree, or as they say in many West African cultures, the stew. Pulse blending the veggies in the food processor will give it this texture and consistency. Be careful not to over blend these veggies in the food processor because you don't want to turn it into a soup. One thing to note about this puree is it's also the base for many meat stews in West African cultures. I have a few videos showing how to make stew with oxtail, mackerel, and smoked turkey. In many West African cultures, those are 3 protein options to serve with jollof rice. And if you're thinking this puree has sofrito vibes, you're right. Sofrito has its essence traced to West African origins. If you haven't done so already, put the heat on medium. Test the stew for flavoring. If it lacks flavor, you can add a couple pinches of salt. If not, it's good to go. Once the stew is ready to go, now it's time to introduce the rice. Dump in the rice and be careful not to create any splashes or a mess. Stir in the rice until it's evenly incorporated with the tomato pepper mixture. Be certain to scrape the sides and the bottom of the pan so that every grain of rice is covered in the tomato pepper mixture. Grab your chicken stock and pour in just enough so that when it rises, it slightly covers the surface of the rice. Be careful not to pour in too much chicken stock. Using the appropriate amount of chicken stock is perhaps the single most critical step in the active cooking phase of this process. Too much chicken stock and you'll drown the rice out, giving you a mushy end product. Not enough chicken stock and you won't give your rice a chance to cook. My recommendation is to start with a little chicken stock. See where you are, and if the liquid doesn't slightly cover the surface of the rice, add a little bit more chicken stock. This is a fail-proof method to ensure you're not using too much chicken stock. Keep in mind you can add water in place of chicken stock, however you might need to add more salt to the dish. Carefully level the rice so that the top layer is smooth. Once the pot begins to slightly bubble on the sides, cover the pot in aluminum foil. The foil will serve as insulation and aid in trapping much of the steam that will be the primary heat source for cooking the rice. Cover the pot with a lid, ensuring there's a snug fit. Relocate the pot to a burner that will give you the lowest heat setting. Allow the rice to cook for approximately 20 to 25 minutes. After that time, remove it from the heat and stir the rice. As you can see here, the rice is slightly expanded and is a little clumpy. Take this time to do a good job of stirring the rice, making sure to scoop from the bottom and scraping the sides of the pot. Make sure to scoop from the bottom of the pot so that the rice on the bottom of the pot doesn't burn. Don't be alarmed when you don't see any liquid in the pan. The steam produced from cooking the rice on low is actually sufficient to cook the rice. Because of the tomato pepper mixture, the rice needs to be cooked low and slow. Once you've done a good job of stirring the rice and scraping the bottom of the pan, go ahead and level the top layer of the rice. Return the foil to cover the rice. Ensure you create a seal around the top of the pot. Cover with the lid and ensure there's a snug fit. Return the rice to the lowest heat setting for an additional 20 to 25 minutes. After that time period, check the rice again for texture and doneness. What you're looking for is for grains of rice to fall out of the spoon. As you can see here, the rice is still a bit clumpy, but based on the look of this rice in comparison to the last time that I scooped the rice, this looks almost done. I can see that the individual grains of rice are beginning to loosen and the overall volume in the pot has increased. As you can see, the reason for using the long grain rice is because it's durable and it can withstand constant stirring during the cooking process. Any other kind of rice and you run the risk of breaking the grains during the stirring process. After you've scooped from the bottom and scraped the sides, go ahead and level out the top layer of the rice. Repeat the steps of covering with the foil and the lid, ensuring that you create a tight seal with the foil and a snug fit with the lid. Return the pot back to the lowest heat setting for an additional 10 to 15 minutes. The third time you'll really need to watch the rice so that it doesn't burn. And after approximately 1 hour, the rice should be cooked. As you can see, the volume of the rice in the pot has increased and the rice separates nicely and falls from the spoon. The rice cooked evenly and separates for a few reasons. I washed the rice in the beginning and removed some of the starch which would otherwise contribute to a sticky rice. I also was very calculating in using an appropriate amount of chicken stock. And finally, I periodically turned and stirred the pot, introducing air into the rice. All 3 steps are critical and necessary for success. And just like that, you're done. All that's left to do is plate and serve with your favorite protein. I paired this jollof rice with stewed oxtail. Don't forget to drizzle some of the stew over the rice. And your West African meal is complete. Dinner is served. Visit theprinceeats.com and on social media for more simple and easy meals just like this one.